Dante Moore played the best game of his career on Friday night.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time. And once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, part of the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all so much for making that the case. GameDay is back in Eugene. I have some thoughts on that with USC coming up. It's going to be a big, tense, and emotional couple of weeks for a lot of us, I imagine, and thoughts on potential playoff matchups as well. This episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Dante Moore had a historic performance, and when I went back and watched the game again and really looked at how he played, it was even better than the numbers would indicate, which is crazy to think about. And I'll talk about the incompletions he had and what happened there, because that's all you have to go off of. But going into this game with USC with an extra day of rest, extra day to prepare, hard to be more confident in Oregon's quarterback after Friday night's game. So if you want to argue Penn State was the best game of Dante's career because it had bigger stakes and all the buildup and it was on the road, that's perfectly fine. But from a pure quarterback standpoint, I think this is the best game that he has played so far. 27 of 30, over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, only took 1 sack, ran a little bit as well. But a couple of things really stood out that I hope continue for him going forward. Number one, he took whatever was there. There wasn't a whole lot of forcing the ball. In fact, I think, as I'll talk about with the incompletions, there were times where he actually made a conscious effort to not force the ball and just kind of get rid of it. And I think that when a quarterback is willing to do that, to me, it tells me that he's in the right headspace, because it means he's not trying to force the issue, feel like he has to do everything, or that he's thinking about too many things, and he's just realizing play to play, all right, let's make the most of whatever we got here and then go on to the next play. And sometimes that meant taking a check down. And there was one in particular where he came off a couple of reads down the field on a double crossers concept and then dumped it to Jordan Davison in the flat, and Davison jukes a guy out of his shoes and picks up like 12, 15 yards. And sometimes that's all quarterbacking is. It's just making sure you get the ball to your playmakers and trust them to go out there and make plays, which Oregon has a lot of those, even though they were shorthanded on Friday night. It didn't feel that way with the way Oregon did not have a 100-yard receiver. They still have not had one this season. I don't know that they'll ever have one, and that's okay. I'm totally fine with that. But the number of weapons Dante has to work with, it has to feel pretty good. So another thing that really stood out was the variety of passes that Dante Moore threw. And I think there are still areas as a pure passer where he can progress, particularly on deep shots, which will be in the second half of this segment. But something that he showed in this game was touch. And for young quarterbacks that have elite physical traits like Dante Moore does, and you'll hear this conversation if you listen to anyone break down film talking about Bryce Underwood, the true freshman over at Michigan, who is going to be really, really good. He's already pretty good, but he makes some freshman mistakes every now and then. But one thing that guys that have those sorts of abilities have to learn how to do is not just be a thrower, but to be a quarterback. And Dante Moore had 2 throws in particular that stood out to me that showed a level of touch that he hasn't always put on display this year. We know the arm is strong, the spiral's tight, the arm angles are great, he can fit the ball into ridiculously tight windows. All of that has shown up for a while, but he's starting to add throws to his repertoire. So there was one in particular that I really liked, and he did this a couple of times, but the seam route he threw on just a little stick and nod concept up the seam in the second quarter to Jamari Johnson, where he's got to get the ball over a linebacker, but inside the corner and also not to the safety. That's more about timing because it's not, it's an intermediate route and the safety's playing deep, of course. But those sorts of throws where he's layering the ball, I don't think that's something that he showed consistently early in the season. And it showed up on Saturday more than I can remember it happening in another particular game, which isn't to say he hasn't made some other really good throws, but it's the type of throw. And if you go watch it, it looks coming off his hand just a little bit softer because he knows, hey, I can't zip this or else it might come out a little low and the linebacker could get a hand on it, or I could sail it and the safety could have a play over the top. But the way that he just kind of touched the ball over the top was really, really good. He did it in another instance as well on a rollout to Jeremiah McLaughlin and on a rollout on a 3rd and 4, which, just because it's a fun fact and I'm a college football sicko, that 3rd and 4 play where 2 Minnesota guys crashed into each other, and I hope that they're all right because they hit each other pretty hard. Benson made the catch in traffic. Malik Benson had a really good day, having to step up without Dacorian Moore and other guys in that receiver room. But that play, I think Will Stein grabbed from Alabama and former Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. Maybe he's had in his back pocket for a while and it just happened, but it's the same play that they ran, Alabama did down at Georgia earlier this year. And it's not the first time, and this is a good thing, that the coaching staff has seen a concept or a play design that has been run by someone else that they then say, we like that and feel like it could fit our personnel, and then they just start applying it. You've seen this with Dylan Thieneman and how he gets used similarly to Caleb Downs, the Ohio State safety. You know, the way that Tyler Warren was used at Penn State a couple times earlier this year, you know, in a Wildcat spot. We've seen that with Kenyon Sadiq. Not as much, of course, but I love when coaches do that sort of stuff because I don't think you should ever be stuck in your ways of these are my plays and this is how I run. No, if you see something that you think works and you want to implement, great. And I thought that was a cool moment. Now, that play is designed really for man coverage so that the linebacker's trailing the running back. You know, it's the reverse pivot. You show sprint left, you roll back to the right. But again, Dante Moore, back to the point I was originally making, he goes to the right and has to get the ball in traffic. It's an incredibly accurate throw, but he's just kind of touching it over the top. And so those sorts of moments really make me appreciate the work that he and Will Stein and the entire offensive staff are putting in throughout the course of the year, because I don't think Dante Moore makes a couple of those throws. And against Minnesota, who has a good defense, not great, but good, I don't think he makes those throws at the beginning of the season. So that progression's been really great. And then another thing that stood out, the pocket presence. On 3rd and 13, you know, he navigated the pocket well. He had that one where he stepped up, slid to his left, kept his eyes downfield, threw it to Sadiq on the move. That's probably a play that had NFL scouts drooling over his potential because it's immense. But the 3rd and 13 throw to Sadiq, where Sadiq is one-on-one and he comes back on a knee and almost catches it with one hand pretty much. Dante Moore gets lit up as that ball is let go. And it takes a lot of moxie and poise to stand in there and know. It wasn't coming from his blind side, it was coming from his front side. So I think he had to at least know he was going to take some kind of hit. And for him to deliver that ball that moves the sticks and later leads to a touchdown was really awesome to see. Now, he was not perfect. It was not a perfect day from Dante Moore. It was statistically one of the best passing days in Oregon football history. And still, there are areas that in a game like USC or Washington in the next couple of weeks, these are the sorts of things hopefully he'll be able to continue to improve upon. But really, I think they're, you know, somewhat big picture and can go into a good offseason of work entering 2026. Hopefully he comes back for the Ducks. If you want to hear what those things are, you're going to have to tune in. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. I'll finish my thoughts on Dante Moore and game day to Eugene. I have several thoughts. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And if you want to spice up college football every week, you know FanDuel's got you covered because they've got point spreads, money line, point total, prop bets, futures bets. If you think Oregon's going to find a way to the Big Ten championship game, you can bet their odds. If you think they're winning it all this year, you can bet that. Everything you possibly want is over there at FanDuel. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we have our second segment sip, and we can hop right into it before I get to the game day thoughts. I just wanted to finish up with Dante Moore. And when I was writing out my show today and going through all my notes, I knew I wasn't going to fit all my Dante Moore thoughts into the first segment. I tried, but I didn't want to shortchange any of the things that stood out. So let's go to the things that Dante Moore maybe wasn't perfect on over the weekend. And again, overall, I still feel really good, but I didn't want to present some picture of, Dante Moore's perfect. There's nothing he needs to get better at. Number one, I think we can establish Dante Moore is not an elite runner. Over the summer when the number about his top speed came out, some of you wondered, just a couple of you sent me a question, hey, you think this is going to be a big part? And I said at the time what I continue to believe. Situationally, in spots, yes, it is something that you use. Like in the Iowa game to break a big run, or the Penn State game when you absolutely have to have it. When Dante Moore ran on Saturday, or on Friday night rather, I was kind of holding my breath a couple times. We can establish at this point, he's just not an elite runner. It's not the way he's been, not the way he played in high school. He's athletic, he can move, he can run, but the inability to score on the first and goal in the first half on Oregon's first drive, they just hurried to the line and had an RPO, just bunched to the bottom, the handoff, the end crashes down. A good running quarterback, Bo Nix or Dylan Gabriel, is going to score that. Dante Moore does not. And then later in the game, when he stumbled going around the edge, he had a good keeper in this game as well, and his mobility is really good. But the best thing about Dante Moore's athleticism is he moves to throw, and that's when he can become really dangerous. Keep plays alive and then do it situationally. But I think we can really go to bed at night knowing, okay, he's not going to become a guy that carries it 10, 15 times a game. But in a couple situations, sure. But it's happened enough, letting up at the Iowa game there at the end. It's just not the way he's wired, and that's okay. It's not what Oregon needs. But certainly we could say Dante Moore, not an elite runner, and that's all right. So, of the 3 incompletions he did have, they looked a little weird, didn't they? So one in particular was really strange, but I actually think was smart. There's a hitch on the far side of the field, and it reminded me a lot of the Bo Nix interception against Utah back in 2022. He completes that long pass to Dante Thornton, and then on one leg tries to throw far side. And I think he was throwing it to McCormick. I think. I could have that wrong. But anyway, it gets picked off. And if there isn't a tripping there, or if the guy doesn't get tripped up, it was Utah's stud defensive back, then it's a pick 6. Anyway, so I think Dante Moore made a read right as he got the ball, looked left, and realized the corner was squatting on it, and then kind of mid-throw just threw it away. But the ball was like 20 yards over the receiver's head. I think it was J-Mac. So that was one of them. And when I went back and watched it, I thought, I think he realized that he'd made a bad read in real time, which again, progress. The other one that was strange was out of the back of the end zone. They ran that same play from the Big Ten championship game. They go bunch with a couple tight ends. They fake the toss and then run a couple guys up. Both Jamari Johnson and Roger Saliapaga are wide open. And Dante Moore has a guy in his face. He's not looking at the right guy. Johnson's probably a little bit more open relative to where the defender was coming from. But that guy obstructed his vision, and then he threw it basically out of the back of the end zone, wanting to miss high instead of low because it's less likely to get intercepted. So those moments, very small. And again, when you have a historic day like that, this is incredibly nitpicky. But those moments were ones that stood out and made me go, well, in this game, it doesn't matter. But against USC or Washington that are better teams than Minnesota or in the playoff, sometimes you only get one chance with guys that open to score. So I'm not super concerned. Those throws looked weird, and I wanted to address them because it was like, whoa, what in the world's going on here? I'm not overly concerned, but anyway, that's what I saw. And then the biggest thing, frankly, his deep ball has to improve. I think whenever the offseason rolls around, which hopefully is not for a very, very long time here on the show, his deep ball has its moments, but Malik Benson early on, that big catch on the opening drive, if Dante Moore lays that out correctly, that's a touchdown. And then Kenyon Sadiq was wide open, made him dive for the ball. That should have been a walk-in touchdown. And by the way, the refs missed a pretty flagrant hold on Alex Harkey on that play, just so you know that it was not at Iowa some big vendetta against the Ducks. Guys are just out there missing calls. It was pretty obvious though. But anyway, so Sadiq was wide open. Like Dante Moore, when no one is around a guy, you can't be trying to make that perfect throw. You gotta just put it on him. And he's done that with Sadiq a couple times this year. So that was it. Those are all the notes. 2 throws, one of which I understand and think was smart. The biggest thing with Dante Moore, I think the deep ball accuracy can improve. Zach sent this question in. Would Dante Moore go to the draft if Oregon runs the table, wins the national championship? Yeah, probably. But anything short of that, I like to think that he comes back. So let's talk about the fact that College Game Day is going to Eugene. And this is awesome. I'm here for it because we know that Eugene on College Game Day is a heck of a scene. And I'm going to enjoy waking up Saturday morning and watching it be on TV, and many of you will be there. And it's an awesome experience. And obviously the game against Indiana did not go as planned earlier this year when they came to town, but I was more than a little surprised that this wound up being the decision. The only other real considerations were non-Power 4 games. And frankly, James Madison, I've talked about this over on Locked On College Football a lot. James Madison could wind up in the playoff just because they have a really good record, but they would be basically what Liberty was a couple of years ago. They had a really good record, but their conference wasn't any good, and so they weren't able to compete with the Ducks really at all. They scored the first 6 points in that game, and you wonder what was good. And then Oregon went on a 45-0 run. Yeah, I think that's what James Madison is, just given their schedule. But, they're in the Sun Belt, which is better in Conference USA. Anyway, James Madison against Washington State, very random, but Washington State's schedule is random. That was another consideration. If I take off my Oregon cap, and again, I love that Duck fans are getting a second crack at it, they should have gone to Montana. If I become neutral arbiter of college football, game day should not be in Eugene this week. I'll take it. Bank error in your favor. Collect $200. Great. That's awesome. I cannot, in good faith, push back on the idea that they should be at the Brawl of the Wild this week. That is a phenomenal rivalry between 2 elite programs. They've already been to Eugene. I know it's an FCS game, but they've been there before. I think that was a missed opportunity from College Game Day. But it is one that, of course, benefits the Ducks. So I had to throw that out there because it's not that Oregon USC isn't a great game. Former Pac-12 rivalry. USC controls their own playoff fate. Oregon might need to win to make the college football playoff. That's something I'll talk about as the week goes on. We'll see how the playoff rankings shake out. But overall, there's a lot on the line this week. Oregon and USC, pretty bitter rivalry. And it's November, and it's a huge game, and that's great. But I was surprised they wound up going there because they don't like going to the same place twice. And the fact that they did is awesome for Oregon. It also gives a completely legitimate gripe to the fans in Missoula and Bozeman that they don't get game day up there. So kind of bummed for those fans, but obviously stoked for Oregon fans. So 51-49. Thumbs up. Good job, game day. But I can't push back on the other argument. So got their Spencer scale of agreement take. The injuries to our team have actually benefited us because teams are unsure who to game plan against. And it is forcing Dante to not hone in on Decorian more. What say you? I don't know that I'd ever say injuries are a good thing. Unless you have someone step up that was getting overlooked by the coaching staff that becomes better, Tom Brady. I don't know where that option is on Oregon's team with the guys that haven't been there. Jamari Johnson is playing well. And if Kenyon Sadiq goes to the NFL draft, I feel better about Jamari Johnson now going into next season as tight end 1 than I did when the season began because he had never had a ton of production and he was coming off an injury. Dude is a beast. He's not Kenyon Sadiq. Nobody is. So when Sadiq is hurt, did Jamari Johnson step up and do well? Yes. Would Oregon be better off if Sadiq is there and Jamari Johnson's the number 2? Also yes. So I don't know that I can name a specific example where players not being there is a benefit. Because I think Oregon's game plan, because of their talent, stays mostly the same. You're just doing it with guys that weren't good enough to beat out the other dudes. But, when Jeremiah McClellan's a backup and Decorian Moore's a starter, how big of a drop-off is it really? Not huge. So, yeah, I got to give that one a 2. Another one came in. This is interesting. This is an interesting one. And this kind of puts my feet to the fire a little bit for a guy who I have heaped praise upon all season, and will say that again after this Minnesota game. Not will. I'm saying it right now. Emmanuel Pranon is Oregon's best offensive lineman. He's really good. And he's going against his whole team on Saturday. So too is Bear Alexander. That's a fun storyline to look at. But SSA, Emmanuel Pranon is the best guard in Oregon history. That's a big statement. Big. History is a long time. Now, when you think of the great Oregon offensive linemen over the years, when I ponder it for the ones I've seen in my life, I know there have been several others that predated my time as an Oregon fan and someone that covers the Ducks. Man, it's a lot of centers and tackles. There have been some good guards, but I go to guys like Penei Sewell, tackle. Josh Connerly, tackle. Jackson Powers Johnson, center. Now, he played guard. He could play guard. So does that count? I don't know. But is Pranon up there? Yeah, if you made an all-Oregon team of the Dan Lanning era, I'd have a tough time keeping Pranon off of that offensive line, which would be a stacked group. I did that a little while ago, I think during one of the bye weeks here on the show. And a lot of talent. I'm pretty sure I put Pranon on that offensive line. And you go through the Mario Cristobal era, man, there were some really good guards. Really good. Shane Lemieux was a really good guard. Calvin Throckmorton and Ryan Walk played guard at different points. They were great. Ryan Walk was the do-everything guy for that Oregon O-line. But the best guard in Oregon history, I don't know that I have as much knowledge as I have stashed in my head about Oregon football. I don't know that I have enough players to go through and make a declarative statement that he's the best one ever. And we've seen him for 10 games, but man, those 10 games have been really good. Really good. And he moved offensive line spots. He played right guard instead of left. Maybe they feel like Yuli's better at left guard, and I think there's some truth to that. So the best guard in Oregon history, I got to give that a 5. There's just not. There are so many players. If I put that at over a 5, 5 is just as likely to be the case as not. Coin flip. There are a lot of guys out there, so I'll put that one at a 5. Instinctually, I want to put it like an 8 because he's playing so well, but there have been so many good Oregon offensive linemen over the years, so that one's a 5. But Pranon, yeah, he continues in my book to be Oregon's best offensive lineman. We are not done with mailbag questions and some thoughts on this Oregon true freshman class. That's all coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. College football is back, and we're all excited, even though there are only 2 regular season games left. The tailgates, the rivalries that Oregon's about to get to, it's all just great. But getting tickets to the games can be more of a battle than the game itself. That's why you want to check out Game Time, because other places give you endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. Game Time gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. 1 week from the day this show airs, I will be watching Oregon basketball in Las Vegas. I got tickets to that particular event on Game Time, and the process was great. I saved money, processed it. Tickets have been on my phone for a long time. It's really easy. I've used it several times. You'll love it. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets or anything else with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Okay, let's get back into it. Talk a little college football playoff angle here. Oregon, if they win their next 2 games, will be in the playoff. No questions asked. They'll probably host a playoff game, which would be the best thing. Shout for a playoff game at Autzen. Man, that would go so hard. So unbelievably hard. by all accounts that I've heard and messages I've gotten and whatnot, shout out to Minnesota fans, by the way. Seem like they're a good fan base. I respect them. So let's talk about this one from a Locked On Ducks insider. Which of the top 3 teams would be the sweetest revenge? Those top 3 teams, now this includes Alabama because Kalen DeBoer's in the fold and they suffered a stumble over the weekend. But you've got Ohio State, revenge for the Rose Bowl, Indiana, revenge from earlier this year, or Kalen DeBoer. Of the 3, I actually have Alabama last. And Ohio State would be first. Because none of those teams got Oregon directly in a moment where they had a chance to go win the national championship. The Ohio State one, because of how the Rose Bowl went, that would be the best game. If Oregon does win their next 2 games, or if they lose one and get in at 10-2, which I think should happen, but I don't think is a guarantee. I know there are plenty of folks out there that don't want that to be the case. I get where you're coming from with the DeBoer angle, but I don't harbor any ill will really towards Kalen DeBoer. The frustrating thing about those games is that it was Washington, not that it was DeBoer. And he's just a really good coach who got beat by Oklahoma on his home field on Saturday. So, yeah, I'd say Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, and Alabama 3. This one from Scott, 2-parter. 1, if and when the Ducks make it to the playoff, the finest of the seedings would be one that sets up Oregon and Indiana for a second matchup. 2, next finest would be Bama for the DeBoer storyline, i.e. what playoff matchup do you most covet? I want the one that gives Oregon the best path, and at some point, though, like all the playoff projections that I'm sure you guys see flying around on Twitter, if you see those projections from national media types, there's still a lot that can happen between now and playoff selection. You've got 2 weeks of the regular season and conference championship games. So the seeding can get shuffled around a lot. But if Oregon were to wind up as, the 8 or 9 seed, like everything you see now is kind of if the playoff ended today and Oregon would play like Notre Dame. We'll see what happens on Tuesday night. And I'll talk about it on Wednesday's show. But, Oregon would play like a Notre Dame at home or Texas Tech. And if they beat them, well, then they go play the number 1 seed Ohio State. And at some point, you or somebody's going to have to beat them. I don't know that there's a most ideal matchup because the committee, the year after Oregon got screwed by it, of course, the committee's gone to a straight seeding system, so they're not working in automatic qualifiers to get a bye when the committee's saying, yeah, we don't think this is the best / most deserving team to get in this position, but we're going to put them there because they won a conference championship. Like Boise State having a bye last year was completely and utterly ridiculous. Boise State should have been the 12 seed, and they should have gone to Texas in the first round, and then they probably would have lost. And then Clemson should have been the 11 seed, and so on and so on. So, yeah, I mean, in the first round, I feel like Oregon, especially if they're at home, has got a great shot against anybody. I don't think there's anyone other than Ohio State that would really have me thinking, boy, I don't know if Oregon plays their best game if they that they aren't going to win. Like if they play, plenty of teams can beat Oregon, don't get me wrong. But Ohio State's the only one I've seen so far that I feel like if Oregon plays a good game, they could just get beat. Everybody else, if Oregon plays a good game, you can have a really good chance to win. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. But I'd be down for another Indiana matchup because that game, I get pretty irritated hearing the national commentary about that game. You would have thought that Oregon lost that game by 20 points instead of it being a tie game with 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Like, yeah, Indiana was a better team. I'm not trying to argue that. But man, the number of comments that I hear on big time shows or on GameDay, all this sort of stuff, and I don't think it's anything malicious. I think people are just forgetting or somehow, I don't know, didn't watch the game, or they've just kind of thought about it and this narrative is just, yeah, Indiana, man, they controlled Oregon. Like, no, they won the game. They were the better team. Like that's not in dispute, but this idea that Oregon just got thrashed by Indiana is ridiculous to me. So anyway, Couple here from Locked On Ducks insiders. How connected would Duck fans feel Dan Lanning without Ducks versus them? If right now it's a 10, I think without Ducks versus them, it would probably be a 7, because he still has a bunch of great comments and he's still a great coach, and I think you'd still see some form of, what he does pre, post, and during the game that would endear him to Oregon fans. But yeah, there's no doubt that I'm sure this is at least part of the intention from his standpoint of why he wants to have the social team do it. And Scott Anderson and his crew do just an incredible job with it every single week. Could you feel better about Oregon's head coach as an Oregon fan listening to or watching the show than you do, because you get to see what the process is like? You get a peek behind the curtain. You get to see how he talks to his players, his team, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I think without it, it'd be a 7, and with it, it's a 10. So, another one that one of my insiders out there asked, and you can become one as well. Link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial, all sorts of perks. Asking about who has redshirted. So, only 2 regular season games left. Postseason does not count. Evan Stewart could fall into this camp, by the way. He could go for a medical redshirt. We'll see if he ends up playing this week. I'll talk about that more in shows later this week. But the guys that we know for now, based on the participation in the last 2 games, and there are only 2 left, Zaire Addison, Douglas Utu, Dimitri Manning, Zach Steskowski, all offensive linemen, Akili Smith, Vander Plug, Dorian Brew, Trey McNutt, both of whom have unfortunately battled injuries this year. And then as of today, before the USC game this week, Toby Hastrup, defensive lineman, and Gavin Nix, a linebacker, have all played in 4. So maybe they don't play it. Again, none of these guys have roles. And bottom line that I'm trying to say is that there isn't a decision to make for the coaching staff over the last couple of games with regards to, do these guys see the field? Do we burn their redshirt, risk anything like that? Like, all these guys are playing once the game gets well under control. But one thing I did want to note with this true freshman class is I knew there were impact players in this 2025 cycle. Oregon just recruited way too well for anything else to really be the case. They're having an even bigger impact than I thought they would. I mean, Jordan Davison looks like Oregon's best running back at times, and Whittington and Hill are, of course, I think Whittington's closer to Jordan Davison, and De'Aaron Hill is kind of, RB2 if those guys are 1A, 1B, or he's RB3 if those guys are 1 and 2. I definitely didn't see their impact coming right away, because we haven't seen a true freshman make an impact at running back since Jordan James, and that was in a reduced role, a minimal role in 2022 as a short yardage guy. And when Davison was doing that at the start of this year, I think we all thought, oh, well, okay, they've done this before and it worked then. Why can't it work now? And then all of a sudden, Jordan Davison is just, his lateral movement for a guy of his size is not normal behavior. It is completely abnormal, and it's a really, really fun thing to watch. But they've definitely made an impact more than I thought because of injuries. Evan Stewart obviously getting hurt, and then Dante Moore getting hurt, and Kyler Casper is out for the year. We've seen Cooper Perry. And, he hasn't made big splash plays at this point in time. Dylan Gresham, by the way, and Jack Ressler also hurt. Like, the injuries at receiver are crazy, and it's just a couple moments. But still, Cooper Perry looks like he belongs out there. He works in the situations where he's called upon to block. When you throw him the ball, which isn't very often, seems ready to rock and roll. He's not the best receiver Oregon's got out there, but you combine those two, and then sneak preview, one of my individual standouts tomorrow is Nasir Wyatt, who I love watching Nasir Wyatt. It's really, really fun. But, between Brandon Finney, Trey McNutt, Naeem Offord, Dorian Brew, you figured there was going to be some level of impact from them as true freshmen. Brandon Finney looks like an All-American corner. I think the best tweet I sent out during the game on Friday night was, Brandon Finney allowed a reception. Let's cancel the season. Like, it's done. It's over. It was a great run. We're on to 2026. But I foresaw some guys having a role, this level of a role, to where if they aren't playing Dante Moore, I knew that he was going to have an impact. But If Oregon went into a game without Jordan Davison, I'd have some questions about what Oregon has on the offensive side. If Brandon Finney, God forbid, gets injured in a game, that is a significant hit. You're arguably losing Oregon's best defender. He's no worse than top 3. So even though I knew there was going to be at least a sprinkling of impact, I did not see this level. And so I don't think anyone is going to redshirt, or I don't think anyone's not redshirting that it is surprising me in a major way, except for maybe Cooper Perry, and that's, I think, been more injury driven. But overall, this true freshman class is awesome. And not every guy that will be an impact player in his Oregon career has started to see the field yet. And that's a really, really fun thing to think about. So we'll end on that note today. I'm already excited for tomorrow's show. I might record it right now. I'm not going to. I have another podcast to do. But I will have a reaction show for Oregon basketball. They take on the Beavs on Monday night on FS1, trying to go to 4-0. It hasn't been pretty so far. Hopefully, Jackson Shellstead has his legs underneath him. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.